The Rebellers by Jane Roberts, a novel, published in 1963. Read by Martin John. Chapter 6. The men climbed along slowly, gripping the gritters. When they were all the way on top, Fitch looked down. The ground was dark beneath. Above stretched the ramp itself and the enclosed chemical gardens. Only the undersurface was visible, blocking out everything else. The gritters were cold. A wind whipped up, coming over the flat land of the valley from the mountains. None of the men spoke. Guards were stationed on the ground at regular intervals. Now and then the sound of their voices rose upward on the wind. Fitch's hands and knees were sore. He and the others crawled along on all fours so that their silhouettes wouldn't be seen from below. It took an hour to traverse the girders. When they got to the other end, Sloat motioned to Fitch. "Gunny and I will each go down a different girder," he said. "You stay with me. A guard will be stationed at both points, and we'll have to jump them simultaneously. Ready?" Fitch nodded. Going down was far more difficult than going up had been. There was the constant danger of slipping. Directly beneath, a guard stood, about 3 feet away, looking toward the dark landscape. Across from Fitch and Sloat, Gunny slid down as silently as an animal. For a moment the 3 men were motionless. Then Sloat gave the signal to attack. Together they leaped the last few feet to the ground. The guard closest to Fitch swung around with surprise, but Sloat came up from behind and knocked him out with an expert tap at the back of the neck. Gunny was having trouble, however. The sound of a scuffle was dangerously loud. Fitch and Sloat ran over just as the other guard yelled out and then slumped to the ground. Fitch, Gunny, and Sloat dashed in a zigzag line across the level land toward a group of short, squat buildings. A vehicle was waiting, and they jumped in. Shouts rose from the clearing behind them. A shot rang out. The vehicle took off quickly. Amazed, Fitch found himself riding just above the ground, skimming along above 5 feet in the air. Lights flashed on, but the vehicle sped on just ahead of the circle of illumination. "We'll be all right now," Gunny said with obvious satisfaction. "We'd never have made it, though, if Toby hadn't arranged to have this A-cop waiting. That damn guard really moved fast, and I'm pretty quick myself." "That's true you are," Sloat said. "All in all, we're lucky." He spoke in a quiet, dry voice. Fitch looked sideways at him and realized for the first time that Sloat didn't like Gunny at all. Hell, we made it, didn't we? Gunny said. You're right. We can't operate at maximum efficiency all the time, I guess, Sloat said. This time he hid his antagonism so well that Fitch wondered if he had imagined it. What do you call this plane or car or whatever it is? Sloat said, It's the craziest looking contraption I ever saw. Like a hollowed out plate with a cab on top. Aerocopter, ACOP for short, Gunny said with a grin. When we're over flat land like now, it rises on a cushion of air and hovers above the earth. It's noisy, though, as you probably noticed, and it won't rise very far. You'll see when we get to the hills. We'll use it like a copter. Hidden wings drop out, and we can get some altitude. Works like a regular little car, too. Rolls along the ground. Country used to be full of these things. Sloat managed to steal this one from Elmira Borough officials. Damn near made him a hero with Toby. Elmira Borough? Call it City 16 if you want, Gunny said. The old name still sticks, though. How come the chemical gardens were dark? I thought you said that they worked there night and day. They do, Sloat said. Those structures are old, built during the American-Chinese War scare. Russia and the United States were allies. Only the war never came off. The population explosion killed China off first. Anyhow, the chemical gardens were camouflaged so that no light shows through. From the air, the damn thing looks like mountains, or they did. When they were built, the hills around were loaded with trees, so they covered the roof of the gardens with artificial foliage. Only thing is, now the real mountains are bare, and the artificial ones stick out like a sore thumb. I thought you didn't have any knowledge of the past. We have records since the rebellers began, but none earlier, Gunny said. We think that the world was entirely different then, but we aren't sure. To tell the truth, I couldn't care less. Whatever people have, they deserve. That's how I look at it. Sloat grimaced and started to speak, then changed his mind. Gunny said, It may not look like it at night, but those hills above are crowded as the devil. Finch couldn't see in the darkness, but he sensed the long, twisting, narrow ledges that rose up from the old gutted road. Huts and caves clutter the whole damn mountain, Gunny said. The land isn't any good for anything either. It's all loaded with rocks. The people, haters, live there. They eat grubs and God knows what else. Now and then the local borough subdivision cleans them out, but the place fills right up again. People haters? Fitch said. That's a new one. Traitors, Gunny said angrily. Can't stand the sight of their own species. You're a fine one to talk, Fitch said. I mean it, Gunny said. We've tried to get them to join the rebellers. Toby gave a swell talk to them one night, and they damn near shoved him off the side of the mountain. They even hate themselves. They go there to get away from the rest of mankind, and the place is as crowded as anywhere else. Now and then it all bubbles up, though. Hate or something. They had a death dance that's famous. 500 danced themselves to death in one night. Nice commentary, isn't it? Sloat said. Great. By the way, how come the roads are so empty? Gunny chuckled. Thieves and looters run wild at night. Anyone with any sense at all digs in some place and stays there till daybreak. Only the chemical gardens separate the various subdivisions of the Countropolis, you know, and right here we're in the small wasteland between. Another thing, Fitch said. My roommate at the gallery tried to escape with me. After I blacked out, I never saw him again. And we've been in such a rush that I haven't had time to ask you about him. Maybe he got picked up by the gallery guards themselves, Sloat said. Reinforcements came almost immediately, and the attackers were repelled. Can't blame the people, though. They were hungry. The Burrows, trying to keep it quiet, but another bout of the plague is on its way. The chemical gardens are already beginning to suffer from lack of workers. For a moment they stopped talking. The ACOP sped along, but now the land was growing mountainous, and Sloat changed the control over to copter, and the vehicle rose higher. The hills are getting steeper, Fitch said. Are we still heading north? The ACOP was two-seated, with a plastic hood. Fitch sat in the front with Sloat. A sudden movement from the back made Fitch turn, but it was too late. Gunny slipped a blindfold over his head and laughed with that nervous excitability. Sorry, Sloat said. From now on, our trip has to be secret. It won't be long, though. For a while the ACOP went ahead, but then it turned. Fitch was certain that they'd reversed their direction completely, and were backtracking to some extent. Then suddenly the ACOP came directly but slowly down. Sloat and Gunny helped Fitch out, but they wouldn't remove the blindfold. The air was strangely warm for late October, but cold air rushed up from somewhere below. We're going to have a long, damn Indian summer, Gunny grumbled. Great plague weather. Sloat agreed grimly. Fitch was quiet, trying to get his bearings. The ground was damp, and he smelled moisture. But as far as he knew, the Chemung River was miles to the east. Something was moved aside. He presumed it was a rock. Sloat stood aside while Gunny guided Fitch inside. Then the doorway, if it was a doorway, closed. Though the dampness was worse than ever now, the shafts of cold air were stationary, as if they were in some kind of refrigerated compartment. They walked along in single file, then changed directions, turning sharply to the left. Once Fitch put his hand out and recoiled. The close walls were slimy with mud. Behind him, Gunny saw Fitch's motion and snickered. They went down some steps. Then the ground became uniform and even. At the bottom of the stairs, Sloat removed Fitch's blindfold. They stood in a long, narrow, dimly lit corridor that stretched as far as Fitch could see. The stone walls were stratified. They leaned over at the top to form a peak, as if, once perpendicular, they had been shoved together by some cataclysm. Doorways opened off the hallway. Sloat bowed with mock deference and opened the first door. "Your room for the night," Gunny said with a sudden friendly leer. "Get a good night's sleep. You'll need it. In the morning you'll get a batch of blood tests, and then you'll meet Toby." Fitch looked around the room, hardly believing his eyes. Still smiling, Sloat said, "Not bad, huh?" He closed the door quickly. A key turned in the lock. Fitch shrugged and went all the way inside. The room amazed him. He'd never seen a place so luxuriously furnished. Rugs lined the rock floor. There were 2 upholstered chairs. Dim lights glimmered from the ceiling. The rock walls were a pale green, and to the end of the room stood a large bed, complete with pillows and blankets. Next to the bed, a table held a pitcher of milk and a platter of crackers. A shelf and wall mirror were behind the door, and the shelf was equipped with shaving supplies. There was even a basin of water. The bed captured Fitch's interest immediately. He always slept on a narrow cot at the gallery, and the bed looked wide enough to sleep 10. He whistled to himself. If Mandy could only see him now. Except for the few noises he made, the room was very quiet. He presumed that it was soundproof. The warmth made him drowsy, and yet all the while he remained alert and uneasy. Why was he being put up in such luxury? He'd taken it for granted that the whole establishment was similarly decked out. But now he reminded himself that for all he knew, this could be the only such room in the place. He was hungry and thirsty, but too suspicious to try the milk and crackers. Suppose that they were drugged. He still viewed the bed with enthusiastic delight, but it looked so inviting that he fought off the desire to lay down. He did take off his clothes and put on a long woolen robe that had been laid out for him. The garment was coarse and heavily woven, but it was the most beautiful cloth that he'd seen in years. Feeling like a fool, he prowled around the room, trying to find something wrong. He went over and picked up a pillow from the bed, punched at it automatically, and tossed it down. Then he picked it up again carefully. It looked ordinary, yet his fingers discovered uneven small bumps like wires far within. Without ripping the pillow apart, he couldn't tell what was inside, and he didn't want his inspection to be apparent. Beside him was the table with the crackers and milk. He picked some of the crackers up, staring at them critically. He was hungry enough to eat the plate. Then a vague scrawl on one of the crackers caught his eye. He spilled the plateful on the table. The crackers were brown, uneven in texture, covered with a sticky grayish frosting. A few letters were scrawled in the frosting of about 7 crackers. The whole message read, "Food safe, bed no." The lettering was almost illegible, but it was there. He started to laugh. "Eat the evidence," he said to himself. "Pretty tricky." He stuffed the crackers down, wondering who could have sent the warning. And what could be wrong with the bed? He went back to re-examine the suspicious pillow. But just feeling the pillow gave him no clue. He frowned. Suppose the bed and the pillows were harmless unless someone was lying on the bed. He looked around for something heavy enough to simulate a man's weight, and saw the 2 chairs. Quickly he piled both of them on the bed, lying one up against the pillow, where his own head would lay if he was sleeping there. Then he stood aside and waited. He was prepared for anything but what happened. A very slight noise rose up. It grew louder. He braced himself. A comforting lullaby gradually drifted to his ears. For an instant he was too surprised to move. Then he approached the bed and stood with his ear pressed close to the pillow. The sound of soft lulling violins was so pleasant that he paused. Then, quickly, he jumped back. The music was far different from the mad chanting of the death dancers, and yet it was even more insidious. It was tempting. He backed away still further. Yet curiosity got the best of him. What was the point of the whole thing? His sense of humor intruded. It was ludicrous, he thought, this lulling of a grown man to sleep. Cautiously he approached the bed again. The music was deeper in tone now, but still muted. It would be quite clear, though, to a man sleeping in the bed. Quick images flashed into his mind, long-forgotten memories of being held in his mother's arms, subconscious longings for dependence and submission, a humiliating variety of infantile suggestions. He He sprang away again, this time only by exerting the full strength of his will. His forehead was wet with perspiration. Suddenly the music faded away. A voice began to speak softly, but with restrained confidence. But this time Fitch sprang forward impatiently. He was angry, and he wanted to know what the rebellers' game was. The voice said clearly, "The rebellers are the hope of mankind. Your hope. The rebellers are the hope of mankind. Your hope. The rebellers." He ran to the bed and threw the chair on the floor. Relieved of the weight on the bed, the mechanism that activated the pillow shut off, and the room was quiet. Fitch frowned. Conditions outside had appalled him. Certainly the people needed some hope and some help, but if the rebellers had any such intentions, then why the propaganda and trickery? Perhaps he was now in a prison of a different sort than the gallery. Yet suddenly the challenge exhilarated him. He prowled about the room. His competent eyes, used to judging line and color, now turned to every detail about the room. Then it occurred to him that pretended innocence might be to his advantage. One chair was still on the bed where he put it. He lifted the other one back on the pillow. If there was any way of telling whether or not the bed was occupied, then the weight of the chairs would keep the mechanism going all night. To all appearances, it would look as if his indoctrination was complete. In the meantime, he decided to take advantage of the lull to get some rest. He finished the crackers, drank the milk, and went to sleep on the carpeted floor, far enough away from the bed so that the sounds from the pillow were not audible. When he awakened, he had no idea of the time. The room had no windows, and though he thought it was early morning, he couldn't be sure. He sprung up, removed the chairs from the bed, and messed up the bedding in what he hoped was a natural manner. Then, grinning to himself, he began to wash his face and hands in the basin of water. He had just finished when a key turned the door. Quickly he stepped behind, alert and ready. The doorknob moved quietly. In Chapter 6. Peace, light, and love. Aloha.